Afternoon everyone, and welcome to the latest video. And apologies, I had some real sound problems recording this one, so I'm having to do a after action voice recording to try and give you a commentary without all the background noise on it. So I'm afraid you won't hear any dice rolling in this version. I'll put the original unedited version up as well, but you might find that the crackling on the microphone is not particularly bearable. It was rubbing against my t-shirt collar. And I didn't realise it while I was recording everything. So anyway, this is the voiceover version, so hopefully cleaned up a bit, and we'll see how this goes. This is a small cavalry skirmish set in the Peninsula, and you're just having an overview of the figures on the table. We've got a French cavalry brigade, and it is pursuing with the force you can see here. A small British blocking force, a light cavalry brigade of light dragoons and hussars with a horse artillery battery in support. That was being pursued by a division of French light cavalry that had 2 regiments of hussars and 2 regiments of lancers, also supported by a light cavalry brigade. So the French objective is to drive off the British blocking force, and here you can see the French coming into view, and the British objective is to delay the French and prevent them pursuing the main British army. What the French don't realise is this is actually an ambush scenario, and the British will be able to deploy in short order a couple of extra brigades, and we'll see how they affect the play. Alright, so we'll kick the game off, rolling for ADCs and for initiative. The British have 1 on-table regiment and 2 that will be swiftly coming on reserve if we roll well in this turn, and for the French we'll have 2 ADCs, 1 for the Lance Brigade and 1 for the Light Cavalry Brigade. As we roll for activation in the first turn, if I can remember this rightly, we only get 1 ADC available for the British, and we apply that to bring on 1 of our reserve cavalry regiments. And for the French, I believe I get both brigades activated. All right. We'll move on and then see as we roll for who's got first turn. All right, so here we go. Here's who's got initiative, and you can see that the French indeed have retained initiative this turn, perhaps suitable given the number of hesitant allied brigades we've got and the fact that the trap has slightly been missprung. So for the French, we have, there's no charges to declare, as this is the first turn of the game, and everything was out of charge range. So the British brigade that was hesitant has deployed and deployed its foot artillery, as you can see in the centre there. And the French have pushed forward, looking to carry out their orders and execute their attack against the blocking force. And this includes moving up the foot artillery battery that you can see there, including its deployed artillery crew. Meanwhile, for the Allies on the Allied left-hand flank, the first of their reserves have moved on table. That is the British Life Guards. So they're threatening the right-hand flank of this French formation. All right, with movement completed, it's time for firing in this game, and unusually for a game of General d'Armée, this is not going to be the preponderant part of the game, as we've only got a couple of artillery batteries. And okay, so the British artillery is deployed, and it's going to fire at one of these 2 approaching Lancer formations, and it chooses the left-hand one. We roll a 6, which causes a couple of casualties to the advancing French. All right. Let's move on to the next turn. So firstly, we have to roll for ADCs. How many do we get? Then allocate them and roll for activation. So in this turn for the Allies, again, we're reasonably unsuccessful. We only get one ADC available, and we allocate that ADC to bringing on the 2nd reserve brigade for the British. Whereas for the French, we have more success, I think, with our ADCs, and we roll for activation of those as well, and we get both, I believe, French brigades activated for this turn in the game. All right, rolling for initiative, and the French successfully gain initiative in turn 2. All right, moving into turn 2, the French did, as we have said, gain initiative, which means that the Allied reserves have not, second unit has not appeared on its flanks. So at the moment it thinks it's only got the heavy cavalry threatening on its right. So it's looking still to obey its orders and destroy this British blocking force. So as you just saw, those 2 Lancer regiments have moved forward and indeed charged the British Light Brigade. Cognizant of the threat of the British Life Guard, the Hussar Brigade then has deployed to its right flank, turning to face the advancing British Heavy Cavalry and deploying the French Artillery Battery as well in their support. Meanwhile, at the end of the turn, the British get to do their movement and they move their final Heavy Cavalry Brigade onto the corner in the top of the screen. All right, now let's move on to the French charges. So first thing, we get a defensive artillery shot from the supporting artillery battery, and that opens up and has caused 3 casualties on the Lancer unit moving up on the right, and indeed a discipline test. And you'll see, rolling the discipline test, the French successfully pass that and are able to continue their charge into the Allied Light Cavalry Brigade. All right, looking at both of these charges by the French Lancers, charging the Light Dragoons on the right and the Hussars on the left. Let's see how we do. On the left-hand attack, the Lancers roll a 9 and the British Hussars roll a 4. The British Hussars are battle cavalry and the Lancers are only campaign cavalry. So the British Hussars get a bonus. So that combat results in hand-to-hand combat. I think the Lancers get a LAN and the British Hussars fight unformed. On the right-hand attack, the British Light Dragoons do better. They roll a 9 and outmatch the attacking French Lancers, who have to retreat in disorder. All right, now as we move through the rest of this turn, we'll see how this rest of this move plays out. So we continue to have pressure on the French right-hand side, and the French have opened fire with their foot artillery battery. That caused a couple of casualties against the attacking British Guard cavalry, who passed their discipline test. Over here we'll move on to the hand-to-hand combat, and the French roll off against the British for the hand-to-hand combat result. The French get an extra bonus dice for being fighting with a LAN and being Lancers, and the Allies lose a dice for being unformed. And the British have to retreat, and the French fall back to their own lines. So pretty good result for the French there. So this Allied blocking brigade has lost its 1st regiment, and I believe actually it was a rout result, so they will have to do a discipline test. And for the French, probably a pretty good result. So the fall back to their own lines means that the threat of being outflanked by that unit of British heavy cavalry that has just arrived on that table edge will be slightly offset, as they've fallen back to a degree. All right, let's move on to the next turn, and an important turn for ADCs and activations, both for the French and the Allies. With their retreating right-hand Lancer Brigade, the French are really keen to get that activated. And for the British, we've got the Falter test to do, because our right-hand Hussar Brigade retreated off the table unformed. So rolling for activation, the British Heavy Cavalry is activated. Let's roll for that Falter test. We're all a 2, so we'll use our ADC that we allocated for a reroll. That's a 3. That is still a retire result, so unfortunately for the British, their blocking force has been defeated. It has been forced to retire by the French, and will have to fall back off the table edge. Okay, looking now down to the French right flank, we've got some tough choices here. With us activating our Lancer Brigade, they will be able to reform this turn, but there's a risk that the French could be hit in the flank by the British Guard Cavalry. So we've got a tough choice here. Do the French try and pin the British Heavy Cavalry by charging them with Hussars? I think we will. I don't think we've got much choice here. Probably won't end well, but the Hussars are going to charge in against the British Heavy Cavalry. So you can see here the 1st Regiment of Hussars has moved up, supported by the 2nd Regiment of Hussars. And in return, the British Heavy Cavalry, which has not yet been committed, has had a go at charging the French guns. So we'll see how that goes and see whether the French guns, when they do their defensive fire, can hold off that charging British Heavy Cavalry. So we roll pretty well with the French, and we cause a further 2 casualties on the attacking British and force them to take a discipline test. And we roll terribly. We only roll a 3, and that British cavalry unit is now on 4 casualties. So it has failed that discipline test and will have to fall back. So the British are feeling seriously weakened on this flank, and the French gun crews that you just saw are feeling pleased with the morning's work so far, having driven off the attack by this element of the British Guard Cavalry. This is only a retreat result, so it won't cause a falter test, so that's at least some good news for the British. All right, let's do the charge results. So the British will get quite a few bonuses. They are heavy cavalry, they are elite, the French Hussars are only veterans, and the French are riding only campaign cavalry quality horses. So we're going to get several bonuses to the British, and the French roll an 8, the British roll a 7, and with those negative modifiers we need a better result than that. So we'll use our supporting cavalry unit to get a reroll, and unfortunately there was only a 1 in 6 chance of rolling worse, and as always in times of crisis I've rolled worse. So the British will successfully win this charge result. They will charge in, and I think we will go unformed as the French. Okay, across on the other flank we're on normal movement now, so we've moved forward as fast as possible with our final British Heavy Cavalry Brigade. That's threatening the French Lancers. The first unit of uncommitted French Lancers has both slightly stepped to its right and stepped back to present front facing off against the Heavy Cavalry, and the 2nd Lancer Regiment has reformed. Okay, so that's the end of movement, and it's now time for us to get on to the hand-to-hand combat. I can't imagine this will go well for the French, so let's roll the results. How do the British do? How many casualties do we cause for the British? So that's 3, 4, 4 casualties for the British, and for the French I think we caused simply 1 casualty, or it might have been 2, against the British Heavy Cavalry Regiment. So the British heavily win that hand-to-hand combat. The French Hussar Regiment has to retreat and falls back through its colleagues. So unfortunately it has unformed the 2nd French Hussar Regiment, and the British Heavy Cavalry take the ground. So no discipline tests for the British, or no broken falter tests rather, no broken brigades, as that was simply a retreat result. But as you can see here, the French position is not looking great at this point in the game. Although we've succeeded in pushing back the blocking force, on the southern side of this position, the British Heavy Cavalry are poised to charge in against the French Hussars, and they succeed in getting initiative and execute 2 charges. We're getting to a really aggressive part of the game. So the Heavy Dragoons in the north have charged in against the Lancers, and the Life Guard have charged in against the Hussars. Alright, now let's see how we do on these charge results. So again, a really tough call here for the French Lancers. So they're being charged by British Heavy Cavalry. The British Heavy Cavalry are at 1 morale grade higher than the French. So they will get a bonus for that and a bonus for being heavy cavalry. Both sides will commit their general. The French and the British both will get re-rolls, as the French are supported on their right flank by the 2nd Lancer Brigade, and the British Heavy Cavalry are supported by the Scots Greys. All right, let's see how we do on the charge. The French roll a 9, that's a pretty good result, and the British only roll a 6. So given that we've got supports, the British will choose to re-roll, and that takes them up to an 8. So with a 9 result, this is a tough choice for the French. Should we go for a re-roll? I think we will try to see if we can push this charge result more in our favour. So we'll take advantage of our reserve regiment and have a go at re-rolling the 3. See where we get to. Right, we roll a double 6. That means we've won combat, or won the charge result against the British. I think I did realise at this time that I was taking quite a risk there, because despite getting that re-roll, the difference in the charge combat resolution actually just remained the same, and we in any case moved into straight melee results. All right, now let's have a look at the charge results down south. So the British heavy cavalry, now the guard cavalry, now charge into the unformed French hussars. This is not going to go so well, I don't imagine, for the French. Let's have a roll. Okay, so only a 3 again for the British. That's not great. And an 8 for the French. So not an automatic walkover down here. So with our modifiers, we will move into hand-to-hand combat. But the British hussars are unformed, so that almost certainly won't go well. Okay. Now let's see how these various hand-to-hand combats play out for this next turn of fighting. The British are going to get an overwhelming advantage in their combat dice. They get +2 from memory for being heavy cavalry. They get +1 for being elite. They get +1 for being 1 morale grade higher than the French hussars. And the French hussars are also unformed, so the French will lose 2 dice for that. So I think the French run the severe risk of being overwhelmed. Okay, huge bundle of dice to pick up. Let's see how this combat goes. Right. Now, looking at this, we've caused only 2 casualties on the attacking British lifeguard, and although it wasn't in shot, I think from memory we caused 4 casualties against the hussars. So the hussars retreat. They were more than 6 inches distance from their supporting or not supporting hussar brigade that had been driven back last turn. So they do fall back, but they don't disorder the 2nd Hussar Brigade. They do fall back behind them, but they are on actually a rout result, I believe. And the British heavy cavalry have to fall back to their own lines as a result of becoming disordered and needing to reform. So some pressure taken off the French right flank as the French cavalry recoil themselves and the British charge in and fall back. Okay, now let's see how this combat for the Lancers is going on. Again, another great opportunity for the British here. Substantially more British cavalry fighting. They are heavy and are elite. The Lancers do slightly better than the Hussars. They do get 1 more bonus dice for being Lancers in this combat, but still heavily favoured in the way of the British. But a disastrous dice roll for the British troops. So 5, I think that was 4 or 5 casualties caused by the French Lancers. Really, really lucky dice roll, and only 1 or 2 caused by the British in return. So the British regiment will be driven off. They retreat and would disorder their colleagues behind them. And they also have to take extra casualties as a result of that retreat result. So not great result there, and there will be a falter test, I think, on the British this turn, as I think actually that was a rout result. Okay, so it's critical that we get some ADCs for the Allies, and unfortunately, as you probably just saw, we have no ADCs for the Allies this turn, which means that that brigade on its falter test will automatically have to go to a savoir-qui-peur result. So that is not great, and they will fall back off the table edge. So the French have a re-roll over here, and I'm not sure whether I said it was a retreat or a rout result. Unfortunately, the British heavy guard cavalry did cause a rout result here, so that's also a falter test on the French. They rolled a 3, so the French light cavalry, the French hussars, are on a retire result, so they will fall back to their own table edge, and the British Heavy Cavalry Brigade falls back as well with its savoir-keeper. Rolling for initiative, we got an equal roll-off, and I couldn't remember at this point in the game who had initiative in the previous turn, so I decided to grant it to the French. So I'm sure some of you will be screaming at the camera now saying I'm biased in favour of the French. Apologies if I am. Do my best to get it right, but I just couldn't remember at this point. So anyway, it's not a critical roll for initiative, as everyone is just falling back really this turn. So we do the savoir-keeper, and we lose the British Heavy Dragoons, and the Scots Greys remain just on the table edge over on the right-hand side. For the French, we retire, and probably not an overall bad result, as we are now closer at being able to get that light cavalry brigade off the table. But we are dependent on our next falter test, because they remain in falter with a retire result going well for the French. So fingers crossed they'll be able to rally that brigade and then exit them off the table. That's it for activations in this turn. All right, so we've not been too successful in our activation rolls here, unfortunately. So the British and the French have both suffered. The French Light Cavalry Brigade in the top left-hand corner just going out of shot here, and the Scots Greys have both failed to rally and both retire off table. The British continue to savoir-keeper, and the French continue their retire result. So partial success for the French, as their objective was to try and retire off that table edge, and they've successfully done that now with the Light Cavalry Brigade. So what are the British going to do? They've got one more potential attack by the Guard Cavalry, and they're going to have a go. They will look to charge in across this hedge line against the so far highly successful French Lancers. It's still heavy cavalry against Lancers. Fundamentally, the odds should be successfully and significantly in favour of the British. So let's roll the charge results and see if the British can successfully get in this probably last combat of the game. So this should be heavily, again, in favour of the Lifeguard. We get bonuses for heavy cavalry, we get bonuses for being elite, we get bonuses for being 2 morale grades better than the British. So let's see how we do. Heavily stacked in favour of the Allies, and we cause 4 casualties on the French Lancers. But somewhat remarkably, we cause 5 casualties in return by the Lancer Brigade, despite rolling several less dice than the British in their hand-to-hand combat. So these Lancers continue to perform in an outstanding fashion. They've broken 2 British heavy cavalry brigades and single-handedly driven off the light cavalry as well. So the French have to take the ground, and the British cavalry retreat. So at that point, I think we'll call this one as a victory for the French. And it certainly feels to me that those Lancers, when they next fight in the Peninsula, should certainly be rated as veterans. All right, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. As I say, I'm going to leave the previous video on with the interference on the microphone, so there'll be 2 to listen to. Take your pick, see which ones you prefer. The other one's probably got a slightly more natural commentary and will be a bit better on the modifiers I'm applying to the various different attacks, because I was consulting the tables at the time. And it is remarkably hard to do a commentary, I realise, in hindsight. So anyway, really trust you've enjoyed watching the game. Here are some final shots of the successful French units who fought so well in this combat in Spain today. So do subscribe and do tell your friends about the channel. Really appreciate any feedback. And again, sorry about this one. We'll try to get it right next time. Cheers.